Hello everyone, welcome to Meshery the Build in CI call. This is today is December 28th, and this is the specific call where we would be discussing different areas of enhancement in Meshery, whether it relates to testing or it relates to building things like building the project or like releases and start another DevOps related stuff. We would be covering a number of items which are on today's agenda. Before moving forward, there are a couple of housekeeping items. First is like if you're joining live on this call through Zoom, then ensure that you add your names in the meeting minutes. I've already shared the link in the chat. And the second is like ensure that you introduce yourself to other folks on the community and joining on this call. So, Ankit, would you like to introduce yourself? I think you're joining for the first time.
Hello. So, I joined a newcomers meet today, and they told me that there will be a CI/CD meetup for a update. So I thought I might get to know something. So I'm here just to know.
Yes, so have you have any experience building the project or working on any testing framework before?
Not quite. I'm mostly from the front end side and all, but in the back end, I haven't managed something like very complex something.
Okay, have you already built Meshery and like played with the project?
Yeah, I have set up my account on the playground and I got the access as well. And I also set up the Docker and Meshery extension on my local.
Okay, okay, that's cool. So that's great. We'll ensure that you get a new item to work on. I think Rabul, are you also joining for the first time?
Yes, Pranav.
Would
Recently, today I joined the newcomers meeting. Over there, they discussed like the if you want to work in the CI/CD part or the Golang part, there will be a meet at 11:30 o'clock. So I'm here. Let's begin. Let's see what's new.
yeah. So like, what's your past experience? Have you worked on it with any testing framework or worked with workflows before?
I haven't worked with workflows, but for the Litmus, they were building the what I can say a backstage plugin. And I fixed some issues and did some part over there. But if you ask me for a whole new purpose, I will glad to learn from the scratch in here.
Yeah, okay, that would be great. Have you already built Meshery before or played with the project locally or on Playground?
Recently, I have set up my server, the provider UI and the UI, and for the what I can say, working on the docs. Like I have recently raised a PR for where the Jenkins logic was um, disclosed. So we are integrating the all the parts like that.
Okay, okay, that's cool. So you're already making great strides in the project. That's great. Mm,
Yeah,
Okay, so I
thanks.
think yeah, thank you. Mahbub, you are also new on this call. Mm, Would you like to introduce? I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Mehbud. Okay, I believe there might be some technical challenges, so you can also introduce on the chat. So I think the rest of the members are all timers. So let's get started with our first item, which is the standing item. Basically, the one item which we discuss in all the calls, so that first of all, every like new member joining this meet knows like what are the different test plans, what we're really looking forward to, and what's the different things we look forward, what the different components of Meshy project and how each one of them is separately managed and tested. So the link is already in the this meeting minutes. Ensure that you can go to the specific test spreadsheet. So the first thing is it has a number of like different, basically it lists out different tests that Meshery should integrate, have a test for, basically different components of Meshery, like what scenario the specific test should be testing, the action the test should be like taking care of, whether it should run a curl command or should do brew and install Meshery CTL. the expected outcome from the test, and things like any guidelines if there are, or whether it's already being covered in any of the existing E2E tests or not. Um, so yeah, basically like this is quite old, and I think we need to update it based on like we have already, in case you missed, we already made a recent dot 8 assigned release roadmap item on discussion forum. So yeah, basically to include all those different things, and a number of things usually are already covered if you go to the dot GitHub folder of Meshery. So like first thing is in really understanding the different component which you like to test, and the second thing is like what particular action you are going to test for that component. So like before going deeper into the spreadsheet, let me show you one of the A2E tests that we have. So if you go to Meshery Istio adapter, which this gives a very good example of what kind of level of testing we do for different components. So let's say you go to Meshery Istio adapter, which is like one of the adapters of Meshery that helps you integrate with Meshery Istio service mesh. Basically, it brings in all the different capabilities of the Istio service mesh. Then Meshery registered all those capabilities into its registry. Then it's like Meshery can not only help um it's like provision service meshes, specifically Istio service mesh, but it can also bring in other add-ons and other things. So so basically, the work of this E2E test is to first start up a small Kubernetes cluster in this GitHub hosted runners, and then it's like once the Kubernetes cluster is started, then it installs the Meshery binaries using Meshery CDL. It install Meshery. Once Meshery boots up, then it starts the adapter. Like all these components are Go programs, so Meshery in the backend is written in Go. Same is for adapter. So once these come up, then Meshery adapter is used to provision the service mesh. So basically, this actually calls the another workflow which we'll see. But basically, this workflow calls starts the adapter, then provisions this Istio service mesh, and it actually looks out for these specific assertions. Um, Basically, like these pods, like as you can see, that's showing that these specific resource type, that is pod, that is Istio D, Istio egress gateway, Istio ingress gateway, should be available in Istio system. Basically, all these three should be available in Istio system. And if these things come up in a expected time, then we say the test passes, and the specific component, that is Istio adapter, Meshery Istio adapter, is functional and healthy. So before going there, let's see one more thing. That is, if you go to docs.meshery.io, all the test results from that specific workflow are actually published to this documentation. These is actually like one of the interesting thing about the project is that it comes up with its own self-documenting feature. That is, on each release we document whether the specific component is functional or not. So if you go to compatibility matrix, and you'll see that for each version of the Kubernetes whether the specific adapter was functional or not. So you'll see a couple of them surpassing, few are still failing, and there's an open ask to actually fix these. Like we have, so we'll see them a little later in the call, like who would like to work on these. So that was in a nutshell. And if you go to this, so that workflow was actually calling this workflow, which is in Meshery, and it actually takes all those inputs, which I was saying, all those assertions, and then runs all the tests on different clusters, different Kubernetes version, and then do the things that I just said. So yeah, that is an example of what E2E test is currently for the specific component of Meshery. And yeah, we also have a couple of Meshery CTL tests which are written in Go. So if you go a little deeper, and if you want to work specifically in Go side and not in Bash script, like for workflows, then you might want to check out Meshery CTL, where we have like golden files which actually states the specific output for a command, and if that output is not received, then which is different from the golden file, then it's like the command is not correct. Though we have like discussed a number of times, we have to move away from golden files because it very um they easily get outdated because of the number of changes we make on a regular basis to Meshery CTL. So yeah, that is one thing. The second thing is Meshery CTL is also self-documenting. So if you again go here and check any of the Meshery CTL's command, then like all of them are actually documented based on the annotation that we have on each of the specific subcommand that is start or this. So that's the other thing. So those are like two high level examples of what kind of tests we have. So before moving to the other part of the spreadsheet, like any questions on this which I just shared um so far? So okay, if there are no questions, then like I would like to ask like if anybody want to volunteer for fixing these compatibility metrics, like it's pending for quite some time. So there like if you are not into like workflows quite currently, then there's an easy fix which you can do. That is, we have discussed, first thing is like this is very easy, like this name is missing. Basically this shouldn't be a name, this should be Meshery's version which was used for like provisioning, like talking to the adapter and provisioning issue service mesh. So basically if you go like quite like back, you'll find that the version was there, it's just that some recent change has like make it out of whack. So like if you see some other workflow, you might see the version. So this is like very one easy thing which you can do. I would like to ask if anybody would like to volunteer for fixing this. So where do you have to
Um,
go? Yes.
yeah, Pranav, I can try on this.
Okay,
Mm,
sure. Actually, okay. So as you can see here, the version is available, but for others it's not. So what you have to really do, you can explore, but what you have to do is go to this Meshery.github workflows, and you'll find like which like workflow is specifically used for updating the documentation, and then you can just check like what is the missing parameter or why we are not dereferencing the JSON blob properly. So if you find that, then that would be quite easy. Actually, I've already created an issue as well. If you can find, I think the contributor hasn't like probably not made any progress. So you can comment on that issue and I'll assign. Or otherwise, you can create a new one so that we can have fresh start, and I'll assign it to you.
I guess it will be great if you create the issue. Then I will comment on that if
Okay, I'll
that's
try.
okay with
Like
you.
you can also create an issue. Like I just explained the problem, but it's okay. I'll do it after the call.
Yeah,
Or by the time we finish the call, you can create an issue, and that would be also great. I'll just assign you, and then you can look into it. Okay, so next thing we have is the next part of the spreadsheet, that is basically a little bit overview of what different workflows we have across different repos. Let's say in Meshery we have all these different workflows. Like one is for building and doing a preview of the site. Basically, whenever we make any changes to the Meshery's docs.meshery.io, then basically when you make update to documentation, then you see a comment of GitHub. So it comes from this workflow. And similarly, we have Docker, Meshery Docker extension. So if you're a Meshery Docker user, and let's say if you go to your dashboard, and if you go to add extension, and you see you search Meshery, and this specific extension is also built through the workflows. So we'll see that. And similarly, the other things are there like ESLint check on PRs so that we don't run out of, basically we don't um, break the rules of UI that we have stated in our prettifier files. Similarly, we have staging, building stable release and edge release, and then we have UI build and other stuff which you can probably read from here. Another thing, which one thing which I'll explain before moving to the other part is like what's the difference between a stable release and edge release. That's you might be thinking. Meshery has a couple of release channels. There are two release channels as of today. One is a stable release, the other one is edge. So whenever we merge any of the PRs, we make an edge release. Edge release is like a pre-release where users can instantly get access to the latest updates, but it's like it's not very sure that all the things would be functional or not, considering like there could be bugs which can easily come up because bugs are inevitable. But yeah, so the stable release is more of a like where you can be 100% sure that nothing would be breaking in most cases. And yeah, so stable release is made. So let me show you. So whenever you go to release drafter and just like hit the release button from here. So that's the like where we just edit this button and like go draft a new release. That's which actually internally calls the stable release workflow. So yeah, and that's the other thing. Let me just quickly go over one of the workflows that is in Meshery, that is build and release stable workflow. So basically the work of this workflow is first is to build a documentation so that our documentation yeah, so another thing is our API docs are auto generated. So in case you don't know, Meshery actually have two kinds of API documentation. One is for REST API, other one is for GraphQL, and both of them are auto generated because if you don't know, we use Swagger for our REST APIs. And what it does is that all the annotations that we have made on our handlers, it this workflow actually this makes Swagger build command builds the YAML file for Swagger, and then there's a make Swagger build docs, which actually yeah, this one. So what this does is that this updates the docs documentation using this Swagger YAML, and then it commits back to the e repo. So yeah, that's one thing. The second same thing is for GraphQL, and I think we're using Ruby for that. And the second thing is this workflow also builds the latest like binary Docker image. So you might have already know like Docker is used for like sharing programs, like making an image and then sharing a Docker hub, then that stuff. So we have a Docker file, of course, and we use that to build this image. We actually build a couple of different images like stable latest and playground. So like a couple of members in the call were just saying about playground. So playground is also built through the same workflow, and we just add this specific tag. The second thing is Meshery CTL. So Meshery also has basically another client that is CTL if you are a CLI user. So it comes up with the same kind of features. And we actually build this CTL binary because you have to like commit it to Brew. If you don't know, Brew is a package manager used for downloading packages. So we committed to that other repo of Brew. So this part of the workflow does that. And yeah, then we just build the Docker desktop extension workflow. And there's one more, we also build the Helm charts. So we'll discuss a little bit on today's call. So Helm charts, basically if you are a Kubernetes user, so you instead of Docker file, you would be using Helm charts. And yeah, we also build the same thing. We commit it to mesh.io repo. Then let's say everything builds perfectly fine and there is no error. Let's say if there was an error, then what we would be doing is like making an email to developers.meshery.io to ensure that like if there is a bug, we report that. If the release is successful, we also report it on the same mailing list. And yeah, and we also do one thing, that is we also like roll out an upgrade to playground. So what playground is actually is a like ephemeral kind of thing where it's get updated on regular basis. So basically everything is cleaned up on a new release so that new every user have a like clean start when a new release is made. So yeah, you can like look up like deeply into the other part of the workflow, but this is not a workflow, it just calls it to the another workflow file. So yeah, that's about it. Any questions on this? Like you can read about other workflows which are there. So I just gave one overview of the main workflow. So yeah, any questions?
So basically, I have a like a kind of question. If we want to have some contribution in any of the workflows, so
Mhm.
basically we have to the whole knowledge about the whole project, right?
Yeah,
Because
it depends like what kind of like thing you are solving. Ideally, it's like you can whatever bug you are fixing, you can create it. I think of it in a sandbox environment wherein you should just ensure that you should know everything about the specific area which you're fixing. And I think that should be it. Like it's not necessary to know everything, but like it depends like what thing you are actually fixing. So that's my point, my yeah, opinion on that. So but
yeah,
it depends. Yeah.
okay.
Hmm. Okay, so I think that was from my side. So I think first item is from Daniel on meshing update. Um, Daniel would like to discuss.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let me share the screen. Okay, so I was working on a feature to deal with mesh sync, and then as part of the build and release, actually the workflow that runs, there was some coverage issues, test coverage issues, and then it also brought to light that we needed to have an end-to-end test for MeshSync so that we can have at least a bit of confidence whenever people are making contributions to the project to ensure that it works end to end. Now, the question that, let me not butcher the name, Ripple had just recently asked that for you to contribute to, say, the build and release, you may need the knowledge of whole working of the system because it helps when you're trying to do some tests. Though we do have some other issues, and I think Pranav can point to them. They're not they do not really require the full running end to end of Meshery, but you may be fixing small things here and there. Like personally, one of the few tasks that I handled when I started doing the build and release CI workflows was just correcting a script that was failing. So you can take over such issues, and then in doing so, it also helps you learn more about the system. Okay, back to the end-to-end test that I was doing. So for us to have an end-to-end test, we need to work with the final binary that each of these particular products has. In this particular case, MeshSync. So on looking at MeshSync, the final output that we expect from it is that it posts the received events to a particular endpoint. And at this point, we use NATS as the communication broker between the mesh server and MeshSync. So the idea that I had for this particular end-to-end test was, let me set up an environment where I'm setting up, I have the NATS server that will receive the information that MeshSync will publish, and then have the MeshSync binary listen to events within. So I'll first set up a Kubernetes cluster, and then with the MeshSync binary, I'll let it listen to the events that are happening in that particular cluster as it would in the Meshery ecosystem, and then publish those events as it would. And then on the other side of the equation, I'll just have a script that will listen out to a particular topic that MeshSync usually publishes to. And then if I receive a substantial amount of messages, in this case, I just chose an arbitrary number as 10. So if I at least receive 10 messages within a given time frame, then I know MeshSync is working correctly. So that was the idea that I had for this particular end-to-end test. So you can actually look at it. There are some few things that I want could be discussed well, like running this particular test. So since I was just doing quick testing, I did it on push event, but I know when we actually want to integrate to the actual, to have it run, we might need it maybe to run on specific pull requests, or maybe when it's being merged. So the particulars towards that was something that I wanted us to have a discussion on. And then also one of the particular, I can say, hard codings that I did is I use a specific version of NATS server. So, but I think the best approach would be having, say, a similar version to what is running in our project, the specific version that NATS has in our project, so that when we do upgrade the Golang packages, this section also updates. So I can make this configurable so that we have a specific version, but the rest of the logic is now up to discussion. How I can this as configurable or as less hard coded as possible, so that we can have it either being reused or by. Yeah. If you have any
On my part,
questions,
it actually,
feedback, if you need to have a
okay, I was just saying that it looks good, but like last time when we discussed, I thought we would be using like Meshery's API to like return all the registered resources into the Meshery's database. So like basically what I thought we would be doing was like running a Meshery server, then running meshing, letting meshing discover something. Then when it would discover, then Meshery would automatically have those discovered resources in the database. We already have an API to retrieve those like resources, so that would be the path we would be using. So I was just thinking that.
oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I think maybe something was lost in the translation, but essentially, so what you're saying is instead of just in this, like it's just script that checks on a particular subject if we've received something. So instead I can introduce at some point here I can introduce running the actual server, and then if you like failure or success should be if we have items within that database.
Yeah, I missed a little bit. I think due to your server was basically I think a network issue. But what I heard was like you were
Oh,
mentioning to start up the Meshery server, and instead of using script, we should use Meshery's API. Did that? Is
yeah.
that what you were mentioning? Okay. So then we can, I think, also remove the use of NATs because
Okay. Yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was saying that then we can also remove the use of NATs because Meshery will automatically have the events which are sent from meshing, so we might not need that.
I apologize for my internet today. It's a bit choppy. Okay. So I think I had we remove nuts.
Yeah, I was saying that basically instead of having a separate job for starting a NAT server and listening to the events shared by meshing, I was thinking if we should just use Meshery server because Meshery server will automatically get all those running resources, basically sending events from into the Meshery server. Meshery server will have all those identified resources. Then we can use a curl command or Meshery to get the resources instead of doing those things.
Okay. Okay. I get that. I'll try and implement that. But I would also like to ask a question. The approach that I was going with would allow testing mesh sync as an independent package. Is solution of as a whole.
Yeah, you may as well just test our own stuff. I mean, you're going to put in work to create a NAT server when we have one. If we may as well test our own. You may as well test our own stuff. Like the more of the code that you test in an end-to-end test, the better. The more of it that you flex, the better. Sometimes it's nice to have surgical things that is it more important that we figure out that mesh sync doesn't work with a vanilla NATs, or that mesh sync doesn't work with Meshery broker? With Meshery broker. You can knock out 2 birds or 8 birds with 1 stone. One end-to-end test can flex, and a large portion of code. There is and has been a synthetic check. There has been work put into a synthetic check for MeshSync, in which, like, ideally, whenever you go inside of Meshery UI and you look at the MeshSync chip, you could click on it, and any chip you're performing an ad hoc connectivity test, you're performing a test just to verify that Meshery server can speak to that particular connection, that connection is alive and healthy. And ad hoc connectivity checks like that are useful, but up to a point, like up to the extent that Meshery can reach out and talk to Cube API to say, what version are you running? What version are you, Cube API? That's helpful because you can at least, there's reachability. The cluster is up, there's reachability, and you authed. Now, you rather, you authenticated. Is Meshery authorized to perform any of its provisioning actions? I don't know. Like, that check only took us so far. A full, like, synthetic check, which is a synthetic test, which is what you're doing, is wonderful because it goes like end to end. And that's actually one of the things that has been done a couple of times. I'm not sure if it's still working now for MeshSync. If you click the chip, ideally what would happen is we would go add an annotation to something. We would go create a test namespace. We would go, I don't know, maybe do a handful of things potentially. And as soon as the test is done, we see that those new resources come back, or those augmented resources cycle back full circle, which is what you're doing, which is wonderful. We then delete them, as soon as the test is done. And so, yeah, it's not a bad thing to have a fairly surgical test that's just like, hey, here's in the series of CI checks for each PR that's raised on MeshSync, here's one that's fairly surgical. It is, really just focused on flexing MeshSync and verifying MeshSync, and, to the extent that anything else gets implicated in that test, like Meshery broker, well, that's an aside. And so the question is, like, should we use Meshery broker or not? It's like, we already have one, so just probably just use that one. Like in terms of writing the test, would there be a difference? Hopefully not. Hopefully it would just be better for the project overall, because the two are married, right? If one isn't working, the other one doesn't. It doesn't. If one works but the other one doesn't, neither of them matter. They both have to work. And yeah, to the extent that if you have this synthetic check in which, you put out a few things and you check to see, like, well, that's a wonderful experience to put into Meshery server. Like, so the controllers inside of Meshery server that do provision MeshSync and do, at some point, hopefully, are dynamically updating its config map or dynamically updating its custom resource with either whitelist, blacklist, or whatever we're updating it with. New fingerprints, new composite keys, that this same effort that you're putting in here, well, hopefully it's like hopefully we'll get some reuse between the two. So actually, to the extent that there's a synthetic check within Meshery server, well, maybe all we need to do is just facilitate the invocation of that from within CI. And I don't know that we had much of this. So, like, by the way, the work that you've done looks pretty good. Or, like, I don't mean to, we're not, hopefully we're uplifting it and saying, this is quite important. This is what is needed. I think you did put a check in the box, like accomplish the mission. As we go to maintain it over the long term, the more reuse that we find that it has, like, there's any number of things that will happen with this script and just any script in general, or it will have bugs. It will report false positives. You can't believe how much time we've spent with, like, that crappy Cypress tool over the last couple of years on just, oh man. And anyway, what else will happen? Well, either Daniel will take off, or Daniel will start to work on a different area, and someone else will work on this area or something. And so it's like, oh, okay, so the maintenance of it, someone needs to maintain it because it's gonna, new NATS versions or new tests or new, we're gonna support composite keys now and fingerprints. And so what do we? And so the more that the less one-off it is, and the more, yeah, I mean, there's so many repos and so many projects and so few people to keep them in sync and maintain them. So the more reuse it has, like in a lot of respects, the workflow that you have right here, it's like, wait, hey, like, shouldn't we run that in Meshery server or Meshery pull requests as well? Or like pre-release pull requests as well? Like, wouldn't that be of value? Wouldn't you want to test end to end? Yeah. So to the extent that, and hey, if that synthetic check is also helpful to just ad hoc to users as they want to verify that their deployment is healthy, gosh, I mean, how is that 3 birds with 1 stone that we just looked at, or is that like? So it's a lot of reuse, and then my example of going over that was like that maintainability, that third one. Well, its risk is diminished the more it's reused, or the more systems touch it, and the more people,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There is if you would, I mean, hey, can we merge this one and get some value out of it now? I would. That sounds good to me. Or like, we should, like, can we refactor and take those concepts, massage them, go look at the synthetic check. Well, what I hope is still a synthetic check in Meshery server. When you click on the mesh sync chip, like that would be a really sweet thing to make sure that we've got right. And there's a doc on it, actually, the mesh sync troubleshooting doc. It talks about what it should do, probably in no more depth than what I just described about, than basically what you're doing now, which is like, we don't want to mess with people's environments necessarily, like creating a new test namespace in their prod environment just because somebody was sitting there and clicked on the chip because they didn't know what it did and they just clicked it. Like, whoa, wait. We should do something benign, add an annotation to something. Now, to the extent that there's a barrage of end-to-end checks, it might be nice, because ultimately the like where you can build from this is like, wait, it's not just mesh sync that we need to verify to say that a Meshery server, to use things in the Meshery namespace, that's free and clear, no one cares what's going on, is that we can, I lose my train of thought, thanks. Oh yeah, if you want to understand what constitutes a healthy Meshery deployment, mesh sync and this thing and that thing and this thing and like a lot of, so one of the examples I was just giving is like the ad hoc checks that people can invoke, the connectivity tests, they're helpful up to a certain point. Is Meshery really authorized to? So if we were to make sure that there is a synthetic check, that we label something, we check it, and we get the full circle, but then, gosh, it may not be something that we would invoke when someone clicks on the chip, but maybe a different test that's where we do go out and do some potentially, and we provision a whole new pod, or we like try to change, we try to do something that we go through and we flex all of the authorizations that we normally need, that Meshery normally needs to verify, or you don't have to flex them necessarily. It can just be a check, like a can I, if you're using Kubernetes, kubectl, can I run as this user and just do a dry run and do a check. As subsequent steps to this, I'm just saying, like, as another way of like knocking out another bird. Meshery CTL, by the way, there's a Meshery CTL system check. The name of the command is check. So it's Meshery CTL system check. There's 2 modes to it. There's a pre-flight mode. So when you run that command, and we should probably share it, but And you before you go to install Meshery, it will look around the environment and make an assessment as to whether or not the environment is ready for deployment. What environment? Well, the one that's defined inside of your
Mesh config.
context. Yeah, inside your mesh config. And there are various contexts that you have inside there. So it will look to these things to see if where you're wanting to deployment is available, where you're wanting to deploy Meshery is available and ready to deploy. Now, once you have deployed Meshery, you can just run a system check against your actively running Meshery. And so Daniel, these same checks, you can imagine that they're useful from the other client, Meshery UI. Is Daniel with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, my Zoom. Yeah. Yeah. So right here, I'm certain that if I did have a running Meshery server and these checks were running, I'm certain that it does not invoke a synthetic check with mesh sync. But that would be, I mean, that's almost the pinnacle. Like that's almost, hey, if that's working, yeah, your deployment's working. Like that's almost the singular. If you just had to pick one check, like this might be it. So, because it would have flexed like Meshery's ability to connect to Kubernetes, Meshery's ability to be authorized to augment your cluster, make mutations, make changes, the connectivity, the full system cycle of coming back. And so most of the rest of what you can do with Meshery generally works if that's working. So another area of reuse. So not just the UI client, but the CLI client as well. Anyway, one of the things that I feel for Daniel on, if he's feeling this, is the concept of using a timeout. What a pain in the rump. It's hard to come up with something else in terms of like validations. So we used to use another project, kudo.dev, because it's just it's a framework that lets you define assertions. It lets you say, to say, hey, you should find a resource that has these values. You should find a resource here. And so you just assert that in YAML. You say this, and then Kudo runs the check. And we'd been using it for our conformance tests. And that was when we were doing, anyway, we're not using it, but that's another potential tool to use here as a way of just potentially externalizing. If we do like fourth synthetic checks, maybe it's a way of externalizing what we want for those checks to be in YAML format, so you can read it and then. But yeah. So if you have to use timeouts, it might be like potentially a series of and ultimately a 5-minute deadline. Like there's a deadline of 5 minutes. If we don't get the resource back within 5 minutes or 1 minute or whatever it is, some higher level timeout, some higher level deadline under which if you're polling for a response, if you're polling to see if you can assert what you've asserted is true, if you asserted that you should see this annotation here, and the first time you check it's not there, and then 3 seconds later you do it again and again and again, that you just keep retrying up to the time. I don't. Maybe you're already doing that. I just figured I'd offer that. Anyway, if you were to get super fancy, you do like exponential back off and retry. But don't get super fancy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks. Lots of helpful feedback. I think I'll revert back and then I should have a much more the key components is maintainability, and then making sure that it actually uses our resources. So thank you.
Okay, so I
I
realized my
can't
mic
hear
was
Pranav. Yeah, yeah.
okay. I just, actually my mic was off. So I was saying like I'll go over the call for volunteers, but let's go over my item next. Um, the thing is like I have two updates. One is about recent fix for Mishmap snapshot. So like if you don't know, basically snapshot service is a way of like seeing your changes in the your infrastructure through pull request. Basically GitHub's way of ensuring that your changes are intact and you don't have to actually directly go to each YAML file and to understand what changes are. So this is one of the workflows which helps you like on you. Okay, let me just show. Is it really better? Okay, okay. Basically my internet Wi-Fi is different, but basically if you go to this link you'll realize that there is a Meshery's Helm chart is actually captured here, and that's through the snapshot service. What it does is that internally it runs again Meshery server, and then Meshery, then it uses one of the capabilities of Meshery to actually take a screenshot of your uploaded designs. Design could be in the form of Helm charts or Kubernetes manifest, Docker Compose file, or Meshery design. So once it's uploaded dynamically through the workflow, then what it does in then one of the um, plugins of Meshery is used for creating a snapshot, and then that snapshot for the specific application is posted as a GitHub comment on the pull request. So like you might be wondering how to. First, I can quickly discuss about the fixes. So basically, the fix was about logical changes. So if you just go to this release note, you'll find three PRs. Basically, it fixes the earlier there was a lot of if else condition and that had some false logic, and that was actually causing the workflow to not run properly. So basically, this specific release fixes that. So now how to use it? So if you go to your cloud account, you can go to the documentation as well to understand how to basically use this. But if you go to you go to spaces, you go to connections, and just go to connect to GitHub, and this will actually show your GitHub wizard, basically a step-by-step guide to actually connect to your GitHub repo. And like it's quite self-explanatory. So once you go over this, it will actually connect your account to the specific repo that you select, and it will actually create a new workflow, commit the workflow to your repo. And then whenever you make any changes to that specific basically, okay, let me just show you this right mode. Basically, the workflow that would be committed meshmap.yaml. So if you check this, so when you'll connect your GitHub account with your specific, create a new GitHub connection, then you will have this workflow file in your repo, and you can just specify which path it should look out for when making any changes. This would actually be added dynamically through the connection wizard, so you don't have to do that. But I was just showing an example. So basically, this workflow then runs on any of the changes that you make to your specific path. So yeah, that was the update regarding this, and it's already released, so you can try it. You just have to go to your cloud account and just like get started with this GitHub wizard. Any questions on this? In case you're wondering, you can read more on the documentation, Meshery docs. But yeah, while I share the link, any questions? Okay. Considering there are no more
Yeah,
questions. Okay.
yeah. One thing to mention is that we had a discussion with the maintainers of Artifact Hub. Did you mention this already, Pranav?
No, no, I didn't.
And so that's the wrong colored light. It looked like never mind. And so they had been amenable to a couple of things. One is to, and is this part of the meeting minutes already? Like, is this an agenda item or no?
No, actually.
Oh, okay. So we need to open up an issue because there might be some guys or some and girls. I think it's only dudes on this call at the moment, but that are interested in um, contributing here. So for the people that are on the call, there is this mesh map snapshots is, well, can be quite a helpful thing for understanding what's inside of a Helm chart, for example, or a Kubernetes manifest or whatever. There's a number of different hubs where you can go get Helm charts. One of those is Artifact Hub, artifacthub.io. When you go look at artifacthub.io, you see a bunch of Helm charts and also a number of other types of artifacts, cloud native artifacts from different projects. One of the things that they had agreed to do is to represent Meshery designs as a first class artifact, such that if you create a design here and export it, which you can, that you could check it into Artifact Hub. So Meshery designs would be a first class citizen. So that's great. There's some work to do there. The work to do that is there's an example of how to do that. And so I'm going to go raise an issue, and it might be that one or more of you want to try to tackle that. The second thing that they had agreed to is, is just kind of a recognition of the value of these visualizations. So if there's 10,000, and there's a little over 10,000 Helm charts on Artifact Hub. Meshery can grab each one of them, open them up, render them visually, snapshot them, and provide that screenshot back to Artifact Hub. And so we agreed to do a trial there to see, to start with a handful of Helm charts and see how people like them, see if people like the fact that they can go to, because if you go to meshery.io/catalog right now, there's a super, super tiny version of, in some respects, of Artifact Hub. There's a catalog, and this catalog has WebAssembly filters and Meshery designs, Meshery design patterns. Each of these, if your bandwidth allows it, will, or your DNS allows it, will let you, because it's always DNS, it will show you a screenshot, a snapshot right there. And on Pranav's system, it's just not coming through at the moment, but it's a render, it's a picture, a PNG of your design. Well, so Meshery can grab all the Helm charts, snapshot them, and give back a picture and really enhance, I think, the Artifact Hub catalog browsing experience. They already have support for screenshots. And so anyway, so there's two things for us to try to go do. Anybody on the call interested in that first one? Anyone think that they might be successful in following along an example to get Meshery designs recognized as a first-class citizen on Artifact Hub? In our Meshery CI channel, in our Slack, I'll put a link to the discussion and the example of how that's done, so that any of you who might be interested might be able to look it over a little bit and get a feel for whether or not it's something you're interested in or something that you're capable of taking on. We will put this into the Meshery V08 roadmap, so the upcoming, and that doesn't mean it needs to wait until or like everything around here, we want to get it out the door as quickly and safely.
Could you also talk about the technical skills that you need? Is this JavaScript based, Golang based, something like that? Like, what are
Right.
the skills that someone would need to be able to take up such an issue?
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to make an educated guess that it is, yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah, like, yep. It would range, I shouldn't take an educated guess because it would range from YAML to REST API, like Helm's REST API. I'm sorry, not Helm, Artifact Hub's REST API to potentially some Golang. But I think it would be confined to those things. Because the first thing is like teaching Artifact Hub about Meshery's design. And so Meshery, there's a design schema, and it's just, yeah. So I'll pull up the example of one of their more recent additions where they added support for, I forget what it was. But yeah, that's a great question. I do think that that's as gnarly as it gets, or Golang would be as gnarly as it would get.
Yeah, and also, is it are we looking at, say, a one-time job, or because of course we do understand if we have about 10,000 Helm charts or something like that, we would have an initial bulk job, and then probably after, do we need to maybe periodically query? Yeah, such questions around that.
Yeah. So there's two things to this is a two-parter, so to speak. The first part is a one-shot thing. So the first part is teaching Artifact Hub what a Meshery design is, so that you can go to Meshery, so you can go to Artifact Hub and find all the Meshery designs from whomever. And that's a one-shot thing. And that's the one I was saying probably goes from like YAML to REST API to Golang, somewhere in there. And I just dropped the link or the info into the Meshery CI channel. The second piece to it is this snapshotting. And actually there's a fair bit of, and it's much more like GitHub workflow and REST API client. We already have GitHub workflows that go out and snapshot Helm charts, actually, that we already have. So there's a GitHub workflow that's running right. So to Daniel's point, like there's one that runs right now against against every design. And so it's like there's a bunch of them. They run pretty frequently. They run whenever someone makes a change to a design. And so there's some logic that can, so like understanding what this second one is about is like basically understanding what the mesh map snapshot GitHub action is, and then what like this workflow right here is. And because we would change this there would be a similar workflow to point at charts that are inside of Artifact Hub and not point at charts that are inside of Meshery Cloud. So it's pretty fit. So for the second one, it might sound easier because it should just be this that's needed. There might need to be some enhancement on Meshery, but it sounds easier. It's actually it's also kind of difficult because there is such a high number of them, and because you are tying together a couple of different systems. So the workflow has to talk to an actively running Meshery, has to grab a design or grab a Helm chart, import it, render it, screenshot it, export that screenshot, persist it, tie together the two, then go out to Artifact Hub, tell it, hey, for this chart, here's a screenshot for it. And it's, it's not, it's just a bunch of moving parts or what have you, or like, and it would be a lot harder if a lot of it wasn't already being done. Like it's already being done against one system for one catalog, the Meshery catalog, and now it just needs to be augmented for the other catalog. And so we need to write up a couple of two issues to help distinguish these two things and get some of all those notes that we just said. But yeah, Daniel, I mean, in your case, Daniel, I think you'd be successful with, I think it's kind of interesting. I think the first one would be a little harder, whereas the second one, if this was the only discussion that we had on it, it would take you a while, but I think you'd be successful. I mean, I'm saying it would take you a while because you have to go interact with Artifact Hub, look at its REST API. Like there's a little bit of coordination that ultimately we would have to do with them. We have to do so anyway, in both cases, I will be, and other maintainers here will be helping because there's some cross project coordination to help with and to ultimately what we would want to do is make Meshery snapshots a native feature of Artifact Hub so that people can just go turn it on if they want to. If they have a Helm chart, they can just turn it on. And there's a little bit of convincing that we need to do for art. We need to show some value with a few Helm charts and help them make a decision on whether or not they'd like to make that more of a first class feature, like make it easier to turn on.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have just one quick item which I can discuss about my recent PR on fixing Helm chart. So basically, our Helm chart had an ingress resource and it was like not working fine. There were a couple of reasons. So currently, before this PR, if you try to install Meshery to the Helm release and try to enable the ingress to that override value, then basically doesn't install. And the reason was like, if I show here, is we were not using these conditionals properly, and it was setting this path to fall basically empty, and path cannot be empty because it's a required value. So you can also learn it from mesh map. So I also learned from there. So basically, the fix which I made is couple of things. First is like I've added a default path so that currently earlier it was missing, so I've added that. The second thing is like so basically now what I'm doing is that is the first thing in updating the default values. Second is like I've actually improved the check for our dynamically checking the available Kubernetes API version. The reason is because recent changes to Ingress has actually introduced this support for the service and port and this path type. So it only works if you are on a specific version. So earlier we were doing like this check. I found actually this was more looking good, so I actually improved it to this thing. Basically, what we're doing is by default we're setting is to extensions, which was the earlier older version. Then we are checking if basically any override value is available. We go to that. If it's not, then we just check whether the Kubernetes running Kubernetes have the V1 version. If it does, if it doesn't, then we like check for this one, and like that's the how the check is. That's one. There's a second update. The third is like we were missing the support for ingress class name. This was also added in the I think after Kubernetes 1.18 this was added, and we were not supporting that, so I've added the support for that as well. Like I've already tested in my environment, like it works fine. It's just that I couldn't check the this like specific DNS because I don't have a hosted Kubernetes environment, but I hope it should work. But yeah, that was the update. Any questions on this? It's already released. You can try it on your system or your clusters.
I have a little bit of, not that I know what I'm talking about, but there's two things that I have a little bit of hesitation toward, a little bit of a reservation about. One is the use of prefix versus implementation specific. My sense of it was that the value implementation specific was
Mm-hmm.
a little more, was potentially the more pervasively used default, or was like, but
Yeah,
that's
okay.
based on, yeah.
Okay,
You
I
don't
can
have
tell.
to.
Okay, okay. I've actually read. I can tell a little bit, but we
Oh yeah,
can.
right.
Yeah, actually, what I read was like the implementation path specific depends upon the ingress controller, so it can actually like decide whether to use it as prefix or exact or as like its own implementation. But if you use prefix, it's just that it's the normal thing. Like prefix is like after the slash, it won't be like checking, and exact is like it will be checking the exact thing. So those are those three different types of path types. So the prefix is so I thought better to use prefix because
Sounds good. I when hopefully Danny, one of the users,
yeah.
hopefully he's using traffic as his ingress, or traffic. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, whatever. He's using it as his ingress, and that'll be a proof in the pudding, or that'll be a good example of. It's not the most popular ingress, but it is a popular one, and so it's a anyway. That's good. The second reservation that I had is. This is just a side note, really, and that's that ingress as a resource and ingress class are, you know, eventually sort of going to the wayside,
Yeah.
whereas
API gateway.
yep, is coming more front and center.
Yeah.
There'll be in it, yeah. There's a few other things around our Helm charts that are a little bit bothersome. There's a couple of app versions that don't necessarily automatically get updated in the subcharts. Each of the adapters, there's a subchart for each adapter and their app version. So I just updated it to 7.0. Ideally, they would be updated every time that we go to, like, even that right there, see where it says version 5.0 in the blue, like that's the one that it was. Well, why isn't this updated? Well, this isn't updated because the make commands that we have to generate this README, those are not invoked in our current workflow, the workflow, the GitHub workflow that, and so ideally it would be, as we go to do that, if you scroll down, actually, if you go back to just the Meshery chart, the top level one, there's a README for that chart as well. And this README, it has been manually enhanced with a number of descriptions, like in the description column, and very helpful information that myself and others have typed out. Well, the auto-generated version of this README overwrites that. And so, whoops, we didn't know that. It hasn't been overwritten, but in order for us to automatically generate this documentation, there's a little bit of massaging that needs to be done. So again, for like Krish or Rapul or Dinesh Raj or Aniket, like that, there's another challenge right there. And if you didn't quite follow along with what I said, but you're interested in potentially working on this, here's how you can explore it and get a sense of here's how you can go see the issue in action. What you do is fork the repo, or you make a clone of the Meshery repo. From the root of the repo, type make helm -lint. There's a few make targets for helm lint, helm docs, helm. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not make helm -lint. It's make helm -docs. That will just run. That will generate these readmes, and then you'll see what the problem is. Ideally, these readmes are actually more like embedded in our docs, Meshery docs. Guess what? Meshery docs is in this same Meshery repo, and it's all YAML, and the README is all YAML. or not YAML, I'm sorry, Markdown. It's all Markdown, and the README is all Markdown. So you can integrate this into the docs very easily and present people with a page that describes how to customize your Helm-based deployment. Any takers on that? Anybody's name that I should watch out for that's going to be looking into it? And we've got Krish and Daniel thinking about Artifact Hub stuff. Or did I waste my breath? It's not a waste, but
Okay, so I think that's a wrap. I've also created a couple of volunteer items, so hopefully anybody can take on these as well. But yeah, I think we have covered all the agenda items and we have already surpassed our limit of 1 hour. So I think that's so we'll see you all on the next Meshery build and release call, which would be 2 weeks from now. And I hope everybody has a happy and a safe year. So yeah, happy New Year.
yay. Happy New
Yeah. Happy New
See you.
Year.
What is it? See you next year? Is that what we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Aniket, sorry, I recently joined, so still figuring out. Yeah, sure, totally. There's a lot going on, Aniket. So, but Daniel is a good guy to get to know. I mean, he's been around for a while. Is a good steward, Aniket, to reach out to. So the Slack is pretty active. I'm sure you're in there already, but anyway, have a happy New Year.
Yeah.